I'm a 62-year-old retired nurse from Denver, Colorado. My only son Michael and I have always been close, especially after losing his father to cancer when Michael was just 10. I was so proud to pay for his entire wedding to Tiffany. That's why I was completely blindsided at the rehearsal dinner when Tiffany suddenly screamed at me to get out. The room went silent as everyone stared. My own son just looked down at his plate. If you're watching this from somewhere with a cup of coffee in hand, tap that like button and subscribe. I'm about to reveal what I did after my future daughter-in-law publicly humiliated me the night before her wedding. Life changed dramatically for Michael and me when my husband John died from aggressive pancreatic cancer. One day we were a happy family living in our spacious suburban home. The next I was a 39-year-old widow with a 10-year-old son and mounting medical bills. I had to sell our family home and move us to a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. Michael had to change schools right when he needed stability the most. I still remember his brave face as he packed his childhood bedroom telling me, "It's okay, Mom, we still have each other." That maturity in such a young boy broke my heart and strengthened my resolve to give him the best life possible. I took on double shifts at Denver Memorial Hospital, sometimes working 16 hours straight. Many nights I'd come home exhausted to find Michael had already made himself dinner and started his homework. Despite our challenges, we created our own happiness. Sunday nights became our sacred movie night with homemade popcorn. We started annual summer camping trips in the Colorado mountains where we could forget our troubles. And I never missed making his birthday breakfast in bed, no matter how exhausted I was from work. Michael excelled academically despite our hardships. I'll never forget his middle school science project on renewable energy that won first place. When he made the honor roll semester after semester in high school, I worked a weekend job at a pharmacy just so we could afford the graphing calculator and laptop he needed. College applications were a stressful time for us. When the acceptance letter from Colorado State University's engineering program arrived, we both cried with joy. That night, I secretly calculated how many extra shifts I would need to help with his tuition. The number was daunting, but nothing would stop me from supporting his dreams. Those college years nearly broke me financially, but watching Michael walk across that graduation stage made every sacrifice worthwhile. He was the first in our family to earn a college degree, graduating with honors in mechanical engineering. I still keep his tassel and program in my bedside drawer. After college, Michael landed an excellent position at an engineering firm in Denver. He insisted on taking me out to dinner every Friday night, saying it was his turn to treat me. During these dinners, he'd share his work challenges and achievements, always asking for my advice, even though engineering was far from my nursing expertise. When Michael decided to buy his first home, a modest but nice condo downtown, I surprised him by contributing $10,000 toward his down payment. I had been quietly saving for years, putting aside $20 here and $30 there. He protested at first, but I insisted. "Your dad would have wanted to help," I told him, and that settled it. Throughout his 20s and early 30s, Michael and I maintained our close bond. We spent holidays together, traveled occasionally, and he always included me in major life decisions. We had the kind of relationship many of my friends envied, often asking how I'd raised such a considerate son. "We went through the fire together," I'd explain. "That creates a special bond." Then 2 years ago, everything began to change when Michael attended an engineering conference in Chicago. "Mom, I met someone," Michael announced during our regular Friday dinner. His voice had an excitement I hadn't heard before. "Her name is Tiffany Lawrence. She's incredible." Tiffany worked in marketing for a competing engineering firm. They had met at a mixer during the Chicago conference and spent the entire night talking. Within 2 weeks of returning to Denver, they were officially dating. I first met Tiffany at an upscale restaurant downtown. She arrived 15 minutes late, offering a quick apology about a work call running long. My initial impression was that she was undeniably beautiful, dressed impeccably in designer clothes with perfectly styled blonde hair. She was charming when directly engaged, but seemed to look through me rather than at me when Michael wasn't paying attention. "It's so nice to finally meet you," I said warmly. "Michael has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," she replied with a practiced smile, then immediately turned to discuss weekend plans with Michael. Throughout dinner, I noticed how she redirected the conversation whenever I asked about her family or background. I eventually learned she came from a wealthy family in New York. Her father owned a successful investment firm, and she had attended exclusive private schools before graduating from Cornell University. Within weeks of dating, Tiffany Michaels' behavior began to change subtly. Our Friday dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly. He started missing our usual holiday planning sessions, explaining that Tiffany had already made arrangements for them. When I called, he often seemed rushed or would say he'd call back later but wouldn't. I tried to build a relationship with Tiffany. I invited her for coffee, suggested shopping trips, and asked for her input on birthday gifts for Michael. Her responses were always polite but distant. "Thank you for the invitation, but I'm swamped with work." Or, "That's thoughtful, but I've already got plans." After dating for just 4 months, Michael announced they were moving in together. It seemed rushed to me, but his happiness was infectious. "She's the one, Mom," he declared confidently. I helped them move into Tiffany's luxury downtown apartment twice the size of Michael's condo, which they decided to rent out. The first real tension came during Christmas. Michael had always spent Christmas Eve and morning with me before visiting friends later in the day. That year, Tiffany insisted they spend Christmas Eve with her family, who were flying in from New York. Michael seemed torn, but eventually agreed to come to my house just for Christmas dinner. When they arrived, Tiffany immediately commented on my modest decorations. "How quaint," she said, looking around my living room. "My mother has a professional decorator do our house. The theme this year is Nordic Frost." During dinner, she picked at my traditional ham, asking if I'd used organic ingredients, and mentioning something about her usual private chef. When Michael proudly told her I'd made the apple pie from his grandmother's recipe, she took one small bite and left the rest. As the evening progressed, I noticed Michael jumping to accommodate Tiffany's every request and agreeing with her opinions, even when they contradicted views he'd held firmly for years. When I mentioned his childhood dream of eventually moving to a mountain town, Tiffany laughed. "Michael needs to be in the city for his career. Those small-town dreams aren't realistic for someone with his potential." Instead of defending his longtime aspiration, he nodded in agreement. 10 months into their relationship, Michael called me on a Tuesday night sounding exuberant. "We're engaged," I proposed last night, and she said yes. I expressed genuine happiness for him while trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. 3 days later, they came for dinner to discuss wedding plans. Before I could even serve dessert, Tiffany launched into her vision for an extravagant wedding at the Grand Palmer Hotel, Denver's most exclusive venue. "We're thinking 150 guests minimum," she explained, scrolling through inspiration photos on her phone. "Michelin-starred catering, live string quartet, custom floral installations." When I asked about their budget, Michael looked uncomfortable. "Actually, Mom, we were hoping you could help with the wedding costs. Tiffany's parents are covering the honeymoon in Bali, and with the housing market, my savings are tied up in the condo." Tiffany quickly added, "My parents believe the bride's family pays for the honeymoon and the groom's family covers the wedding. It's tradition." Her tone suggested this was an unquestionable fact. I hesitated, mentally calculating my retirement savings. "I'd be happy to contribute," I said carefully. "What kind of budget were you thinking?" Tiffany named a figure that made my heart race, $30,000. It would deplete nearly half my retirement fund, but looking at Michael's hopeful face, I couldn't say no. "I want to give you a beautiful wedding," I said. "Let me look at my finances and see what I can do." Tiffany smiled for the first time that evening. "Perfect. I already have vendors on hold. They just need deposits by next week." As they were leaving, I offered to help with planning. Tiffany's response was telling. "Oh, don't worry about it. I have very specific ideas. It's better if I handle everything." That night, I made a decision I would later deeply regret. I called my financial advisor the next morning and arranged to withdraw the funds from my retirement account. What started as a $30,000 budget quickly ballooned to over $75,000 as Tiffany added more extravagant elements to the wedding plans. Each time I gently raised concerns about the mounting costs, Tiffany had a ready explanation. The Grand Palmer raised their minimum, or the florist can't get local flowers that weekend, so we need to import from Holland, or everyone knows you can't have a wedding without a champagne fountain. Michael became increasingly defensive whenever I questioned these expenses. "Mom, this is the biggest day of our lives. "Don't you want it to be special?" he would ask, making me feel guilty for even bringing up the subject. I tried repeatedly to be involved in the planning process. When I asked about joining them for cake tasting, Tiffany explained they'd already done it during a weekday when I was busy. When I offered to help address invitations, she informed me that the calligrapher she'd hired handled everything. Even my suggestion of contributing my grandmother's lace handkerchief as Tiffany's something old was politely declined because it didn't match the wedding aesthetic. The most hurtful exclusion came when Tiffany went dress shopping. I learned about it only afterward through photos Michael proudly showed me on his phone. "Why wasn't I invited?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Tiffany said she wanted an unbiased opinion," Michael explained uncomfortably. "Her mother and friends have more experience with designer fashion." At the bridal shower hosted at an exclusive country club by Tiffany's maid of honor, I felt like an unwelcome outsider. Tiffany's friends, all impeccably dressed in what seemed like a uniform of expensive neutrals, formed tight circles that somehow never had space for me to join. When I tried to share stories about Michael as a child, one of Tiffany's friends interrupted to discuss their recent trip to Paris. One afternoon, I received a call from the wedding planner asking for approval on a change to the menu. Confused, I explained that Tiffany made all those decisions. "Oh," she said, sounding surprised. "Tiffany told us to run everything by you first because you're, quote, particular about these things, and it's easier to get your approval up front than deal with complaints later." I was stunned by this mischaracterization. Later, I discovered Tiffany had told several vendors I was difficult, and they should limit their contact with me despite the fact that my name was on all the payment contracts. 6 weeks before the wedding, Tiffany invited me to lunch. I hoped it might be a chance to finally bond, but instead she presented me with a list of suggestions for my appearance at the wedding. "Your dress is a bit too bright," she said of the pale blue gown I'd already purchased. "It will stand out in photos. Something in taupe would be better." She continued with recommendations for my hair, maybe extensions to cover that thin spot, makeup, professional of course, and even weight. "A quick detox could help you drop 5 pounds before the big day." I sat there speechless as she systematically criticized everything about my appearance. For Michael's sake, I nodded and promised to look into a new dress. I spent another $800 I couldn't afford on a muted taupe gown that made me look washed out, but met with Tiffany's approval. The final blow to my bank account came 2 weeks before the wedding, when the venue required the remaining balance. I had to withdraw an additional $20,000 from my rapidly diminishing retirement fund. As I signed the bank withdrawal form, I calculated that I'd spent $78,500 on this wedding, far more than I'd ever spent on anything in my life, including my own modest wedding years ago. Still, I reminded myself that this was for Michael. Despite Tiffany's behavior, I was determined to support my son's happiness. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I went to bed feeling anxious but hopeful that once the wedding stress passed, perhaps Tiffany and I could build a better relationship. How wrong I was. I spent hours getting ready for the rehearsal dinner, determined to look my best. I had my hair professionally styled and splurged on makeup application at a department store. My new dress, while not my usual style, was elegant and appropriate. I'd even practiced a short, heartfelt toast about Michael finding love and my hopes for their future together. The rehearsal dinner was held at La Maison, one of Denver's most expensive French restaurants. Tiffany's parents had flown in from New York and spared no expense booking the entire private dining room. As I entered, I was struck by the opulent flower arrangements and custom-printed menus with Michael and Tiffany's monogram in gold foil. Tiffany's father, Howard Lawrence, a tall, imposing man with silver hair, greeted me with a firm handshake rather than the hug I offered. "You must be Rosie," he said, looking at me as if assessing my market value. "Tiffany's told us all about you." Something in his tone made me wonder exactly what she'd said. His wife Caroline air-kissed near my cheeks, careful not to make actual contact. "That's an interesting choice of jewelry," she commented, eyeing my simple pearl necklace, a treasured gift from my late husband. When it came time to be seated, I was surprised to find my place card at a table far from the main party next to Michael's second cousin, whom he barely knew, and an elderly great-aunt of Tiffany's who was hard of hearing. Michael and Tiffany sat at the center table with their wedding party and both sets of parents except for me. "There must be some mistake," I said to the wedding planner. "The seating arrangement was approved by the bride personally," she replied with an apologetic smile. From my distant table I watched as toasts were made and intimate conversations flowed at the main table. Twice I caught Tiffany looking in my direction while whispering to her bridesmaids, followed by stifled laughter. I focused on being gracious to my table mates, determined not to show how hurt I felt. Halfway through the main course, Tiffany's 5-year-old niece Sophia, who had been running between tables despite her mother's half-hearted attempts to settle her, knocked over a glass of cranberry juice. The red liquid spread quickly across the white tablecloth toward the little girl's fancy dress. Without thinking, I grabbed my napkin and hurried over to help dabbing at the spill before it could ruin the child's outfit. "It's okay, sweetheart," I reassured her as she looked ready to cry. "Accidents happen." That's when everything exploded. Tiffany suddenly stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. Her face was contorted with anger as she pointed directly at me. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. "You don't belong here!" 60 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. My hands froze mid-motion, still holding the napkin. I looked to Michael, certain he would defend me, but he kept his gaze fixed firmly on his plate. "How dare you make a scene at my rehearsal dinner?" Tiffany continued, her voice shrill. "First you try to take over all the wedding planning, and now you're trying to make yourself the center of attention." I was too shocked to respond. None of what she was saying made any sense. I had been systematically excluded from all planning and had been sitting quietly at my assigned table all evening. "You've been trying to undermine my relationship with Michael from day one," she accused. "Everyone can see through your sweet, helpful act. You're just a controlling, jealous mother who can't let go." The room remained deathly quiet. Not a single person, including my own son, spoke up in my defense. Tiffany's father finally broke the silence. "Perhaps it would be best if you left," he suggested in a tone that made it clear this wasn't optional. "For everyone's sake, to keep the peace." I looked once more at Michael, silently pleading with him to say something, anything. He briefly met my eyes, then looked away. His face flushed with what I hoped was shame. With as much dignity as I could muster, I gathered my purse and shawl. "I apologize if I've caused any disturbance," I said quietly. "Congratulations again on your marriage." Then I walked out, feeling the weight of every stare on my back. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for several minutes, too stunned to drive. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. Only when I was halfway home did the tears finally come blurring the road ahead so badly that I had to pull over until the wave of emotion passed. At home, I checked my phone repeatedly, hoping for a call or text from Michael. Surely, once he was away from Tiffany, he would reach out, apologize, explain. But my screen remained dark and silent as midnight came and went. I spent the night alternating between tears and righteous anger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the scene at the restaurant playing over and over, the public humiliation, and worst of all, Michael's downturned face as he chose silence over defending his mother. As I lay awake at 2 a.m, memories flooded back of all the small moments that should have been warning signs. Tiffany accidentally excluding me from event invitations, the way she would talk over me or subtly roll her eyes when I spoke, how Michael gradually adopted her opinions about everything from politics to food preferences, the increasing frequency with which he canceled our plans or cut phone calls short when she entered the room. By 3, a strange calm had settled over me. I got out of bed, made a strong cup of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. Methodically, I began listing every wedding expense I had paid for over the past year: the venue deposit, the final venue payment, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the band, the cake, the open bar package, the wedding planner's fee, the custom invitations. The list went on and on. Next, I pulled out all the contracts and receipts I had carefully filed away. Every single one listed me as the financially responsible party. Every payment had come directly from my accounts. Tiffany had insisted I pay vendors directly rather than giving the money to her and Michael, claiming it was simpler for tax purposes. At 5:30, my phone finally lit up with a text from Michael. Tiffany was just stressed. "Please don't make this a big deal. Everything will be fine after the wedding." No apology, no acknowledgement of how I'd been treated. Just a request to sweep it all under the rug for his convenience. Something broke inside me in that moment. After 28 years of putting his needs before my own, of sacrificing everything from my home to my retirement security for his happiness, he couldn't even muster the courage to stand up for me or offer a genuine apology. For the first time, I saw with perfect clarity that I had raised a son who, despite all my love and sacrifice, was willing to watch me be abused rather than risk his comfortable life with Tiffany. And I had financially enabled the very people who had humiliated me. I spent the next hour reviewing my options. I called my best friend Barbara, despite the early hour. "I was about to call you," she said when she answered. "Lisa was at the rehearsal dinner. She told me what happened. Are you okay?" I was surprised to learn that my neighbor Lisa had been there as a distant relative of one of the groomsmen. It hadn't registered in my state of shock. She said it was awful, Rosie. Everyone was uncomfortable. And she wasn't the only one who noticed how Tiffany has been treating you. We've all seen it, but you've been so determined to support Michael that you couldn't see it. Barbara's confirmation that others had noticed Tiffany's behavior toward me strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just my perception or sensitivity. This was a pattern of deliberate mistreatment that had culminated in public humiliation. After our call, I took the pearl necklace I had planned to give Tiffany as a wedding gift, a family heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother. I placed it back in its velvet box and returned it to my jewelry drawer. Instead, I took out a piece of high-quality stationery and began to write a letter that would change everything. At precisely 9 o'clock, I began making calls to wedding vendors. I started with the venue, the Grand Palmer Hotel. "Good morning," I said to the event manager, a woman named Diane, who had been friendly during our previous interactions. "This is Rosie Wilson, mother of the groom for the Adams-Lawrence wedding scheduled for tomorrow." "Yes, Mrs. Wilson. Is everything all right?" "Unfortunately, no. I need to cancel all services for this event." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Wilson, the wedding is tomorrow. The cancellation period in the contract was 30 days. "I understand," I replied calmly. "I've reviewed the contract. As the financially responsible party, I'm exercising my right to cancel. I understand I'll forfeit the deposits." After some discussion and her obvious concern, Diane's tone softened. "Mrs. Wilson, I don't mean to pry, but is everything okay? This is very unusual." Something in her genuine concern broke through my carefully maintained composure. "No," I admitted. "I was publicly humiliated at the rehearsal dinner last night and asked to leave by the bride. My son did nothing to defend me. I'm no longer willing to finance this wedding." "I'm so sorry that happened to you," she said, her professional tone giving way to genuine sympathy. "Let me see what I can do about the final payment you made last week. It hasn't been fully processed yet." After the venue, I systematically worked through every vendor. The florist who had requested an additional $2,000 just last week for imported peonies, the caterer who had accommodated Tiffany's multiple menu changes, the photographer band cake baker, and finally the wedding planner herself. Most responded with professional courtesy, though I could hear the shock in their voices. The florist, however, was unexpectedly understanding. "Between us, Mrs. Wilson," she confided, "your future daughter-in-law has been one of our most difficult clients ever. 3 complete redesigns, midnight texts with demands, and she made my assistant cry twice. I'm sorry about your situation, but I can't say I'm entirely surprised." The wedding planner was significantly less sympathetic. "Do you understand what you're doing?" she demanded. "This wedding has been in planning for a year. Tiffany will be devastated." "I understand completely," I replied. "Please ensure all communications about the cancellation go directly to me, as I'm the contracting party. You can let Tiffany and Michael know that I'll be sending them a letter explaining my decision." By noon, I had calculated the financial damage. Approximately $15,000 in non-refundable deposits were lost, but I had managed to recover over $60,000 through refunds and stopped payments. It was an expensive lesson, but one I now understood was necessary. The photographer, a kind man named James, actually came to my house to return his advance check in person. "I wanted to tell you that you're not alone," he said on my doorstep. "My mother-in-law did something similar to my wife before our wedding. We didn't see the pattern until it was almost too late. Setting boundaries saved our relationship in the long run, even though it was painful at first." His words reassured me that I wasn't overreacting or being vindictive. This was about finally establishing boundaries after a year of increasingly abusive behavior. I finalized my letter to Michael and Tiffany, typing it for clarity and printing 2 copies. The letter was 4 pages long, detailing every contribution I had made to their wedding, every instance of disrespect I had endured, and my decision to withdraw my financial support. I attached an itemized list of all payments and cancellations. I drove to Michael's condo, where he and Tiffany were staying during the wedding weekend. Their cars were gone likely at the Saturday morning brunch with out-of-town guests. I slipped the envelopes under the door where they couldn't be missed. The first call came at 1:15 p.m., a hysterical voicemail from Tiffany. "How dare you cancel our wedding? Do you have any idea what you've done? This is my special day. My father will sue you for every penny you have." Michael's call came 10 minutes later. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" He demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and panic. "The hotel just called Tiffany saying everything's been canceled. Her parents are furious. You can't do this." "I already have," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've explained everything in my letter." "This is insane." "So Tiffany had a stressful moment last night. That doesn't justify ruining our entire wedding." "What happened last night wasn't a stressful moment, Michael. It was the culmination of a year of disrespect and manipulation, and you stood by and watched it happen." "Mom, please." His voice shifted to pleading. "Just call the vendors back. Tell them it was a mistake. We can talk about this after the honeymoon." "No, Michael. For once, I'm putting myself first. I love you, but I won't finance my own abuse." "Tiffany's parents are threatening legal action," he warned. "I've spoken with Uncle Robert." My brother was an attorney who had already advised me on my legal position. All contracts were in my name. I had every right to cancel services I was paying for. They can try to sue, but they won't win. The call ended with Michael angrily hanging up. Over the next several hours, my phone exploded with messages. Tiffany's parents both left threatening voicemails. Several of Tiffany's bridesmaids sent accusatory texts. But there were supportive messages, too, from family friends who had witnessed the rehearsal dinner incident, and a few distant relatives who had apparently never warmed to Tiffany. By evening, I learned through Barbara that Tiffany's parents were scrambling to save the wedding calling vendors and offering to pay rush fees to reinstate services. Some agreed, many couldn't on such short notice. The wedding would apparently proceed, but in a significantly diminished form. I turned off my phone, took a sleeping pill, and for the first time in months, slept deeply and dreamlessly. The next day, what should have been Michael and Tiffany's wedding day, I drove to my favorite spot in the Rocky Mountain National Park. As I hiked a familiar trail, breathing the clean mountain air and listening to the sounds of nature rather than wedding bells, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. My phone, which I'd briefly turned on before the drive, showed dozens of missed calls and messages. I read only a few. Some were angry denunciations from Tiffany's circle. Others were surprisingly supportive notes from people who had either witnessed her behavior or experienced it themselves. One message in particular stood out from my cousin Grace. "I saw how she treated you all year. I watched Michael change. What you did took tremendous courage. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." The following weeks were difficult. I was portrayed as the villain in Tiffany's narrative, the psycho mother-in-law who had sabotaged their perfect day out of jealousy. Michael remained angry, refusing my calls and responding to texts with one-word answers. I focused on rebuilding my life. I rejoined my book club that I'd neglected during the wedding planning. I reconnected with nursing friends for weekly coffee dates. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional affection of abandoned dogs and cats. 3 weeks after the wedding day, I was surprised to find Michael on my doorstep one evening. He looked tired with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated posture I hadn't seen since his father died. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. We sat at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. "Tiffany's been lying to me," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About everything." Over the next 2 hours, Michael shared his painful awakening. After the reduced wedding ceremony and a shortened honeymoon, he had discovered a series of disturbing truths. Tiffany had been intercepting my messages to him for months, deleting texts and emails where I'd tried to make plans. She had told mutual friends I was interfering and controlling when I'd barely been allowed any involvement at all. Most disturbing to Michael was finding a group chat between Tiffany and her bridesmaids where they had mockingly discussed me for months, planning ways to exclude me while ensuring I still paid for everything. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I was blind. I let her come between us because it was easier than standing up to her. I betrayed you after everything you've done for me." Our reconciliation was tentative at first. Trust had been broken on both sides. But over the following weeks, as Michael continued to see Tiffany's manipulative patterns more clearly, our relationship began to heal. When he finally moved out of their shared apartment 2 months later, I helped him pack without saying, "I told you so," even once. Their divorce was finalized 6 months later. Michael admitted that the problems had been evident long before the wedding, but he'd been too caught up in Tiffany's version of reality to see them clearly. I used some of the recovered wedding funds to finally take my dream trip to Europe, something I'd postponed for decades while raising Michael alone. Walking through the streets of Paris and Rome, I felt a new sense of confidence and self-worth that came from finally standing up for myself. The most valuable lesson from this painful experience was learning that setting boundaries with loved ones isn't cruel. It's necessary for healthy relationships. For too long, I had equated self-sacrifice with love, believing that putting everyone else's needs before my own proved my devotion. Now I understand that real love requires mutual respect. By allowing myself to be mistreated for fear of losing my relationship with my son, I was actually enabling destructive patterns that would have eventually destroyed us both. Michael and I have rebuilt our relationship on a healthier foundation. Our weekly dinners resumed, but with a new honesty between us. We've established new traditions that honor our bond while respecting each other as individuals. Sometimes I think about the pearl necklace still sitting in my jewelry box, the one I'd intended to give Tiffany. Instead, I've decided to reset the pearls into 2 matching bracelets, one for me, and one day perhaps for a daughter-in-law who understands that family means lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest healing. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Remember that it's never too late to reclaim your worth. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to honor yourself even when it isn't easy.